We are live.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Kilgore. I'm Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to the September 11th, 2023 remote meeting. All council committee members and staff are participating virtually, and to help our audience follow along, I will state each section of the agenda aloud. We're streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen by phone. And for those of you out there with us today, we'd like to welcome you. And for today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 8187. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. And at this point, all speakers that want to speak, please push on *3 and enter into the speaker queue if you'd like to speak during the meeting. And at this time, I'd like to go through the roll call and introduce all of the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Council and staff, as I say your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hello, everybody.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Attorney Janice Ashley.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Downtown Project Manager Dana Frankel.
Good afternoon.
Land Development Division Manager Chris Collins.
Hello, good afternoon.
Thank you. And also, Councilwoman Turner will not be joining us today. And I am
here. I'm here.
Oh.
Sandra, I'm here.
Okay. Well,
I'm here with you.
Okay, thank you. And Councilwoman Sage Turner. Okay. And at this time, what we'll do is we will call the meeting to order. And the first thing I'd like to do is get an approval of the minutes, August minutes. Can I get
I'll move.
Second.
Okay, roll call. Okay, I'd like to do Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
Councilwoman Sage Turner. Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Aye.
Okay, and myself, aye, and the motion passes. Okay, we have a couple of things on the agenda today. We have a light agenda. First thing we have is the number 2 item is the outdoor ordinance update. That will be given by Dana Frankel, who's the downtown project manager. And what she'll be doing is reviewing the proposed changes to the outdoor dining ordinance and program. And this will be something that the council, we will move on to council if it passes with us. So at this time, Dana, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Vice Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. I'm happy to be here today to present the proposed updates we're making to the outdoor dining program. And Chris Collins is also joining me and will present a few slides. We also have our urban designer, David Hazard, available should there be standards, questions specific to standards at the end. So you could go to the next slide, please. So starting with our key takeaways, updates are being made to the city's outdoor dining program as applied to public space. So this is as applied to public streets and sidewalks. These updates include a new ordinance, an updated fee structure, as well as updated standards, which will be included in a new outdoor dining guide. Lessons learned during the temporary initiative we launched during COVID, AVL Shares Space, and other public space management engagement and efforts we've been undertaking over many years are being incorporated into these updates. The use of on-street parking spaces for streeteries. So the ability to use parking spaces for outdoor dining is being incorporated into the new ordinance and into the new program. Access and mobility are being prioritized in our new standards, along with maximization of utilization of public space and encouraging greater public benefits whenever possible. And administrative management of the program is also being clarified and improved. Next slide, please. So goals of these updates are to support a safe, welcoming, and active downtown environment, as well as environments in other commercial areas, which this will be applicable to improve the application review and enforcement process, to prioritize mobility and access for all, to transition elements of the temporary program launched during COVID, to continue to support the success and resilience of Asheville's local economy, to more appropriately account for the value of commercializing public space, and to promote multiple public benefits whenever possible. Next slide, please. So, specifically what is being updated, we have a new outdoor dining ordinance. We have an expanded outdoor dining program where previously it just applied to sidewalks. It will now also apply to utilization of public on-street parking spaces. We're proposing updated fees, and we'll be rolling out an outdoor dining guide that has clear standards as well as best practices and provides really detailed guidance for businesses. Next slide, please. So some key elements we're going to dig a little bit further into with you today are a new approach to maximizing use of these spaces in order to encourage maximum public benefit. We'll talk a little bit about the fees that we are proposing, some of the key updates to standards, as well as our plan moving forward for process and management. Next slide, please. But first, just to take you back a little bit and talk about some of the engagement we've done that has informed where we are at this point, really prior to 2019, but very specifically in 2019, staff began working with a downtown public space management task force to do a lot of engagement around how people experience public space in the downtown environment. There was a public survey done, and I just wanted to call out two of the things we learned in that survey. We asked people what contributes to a positive experience downtown, and the second most rated thing people said was outdoor dining. So generally something that's positive. At the same time, we asked folks what was most important to having to their experience downtown. And they said unobstructed sidewalk space for mobility. So these are just examples. We can see how sometimes uses of public space can conflict with each other. And it's why we want to be able to encourage maximum utilization whenever possible and kind of balance these uses. So during 2020, we responded quickly to enable businesses to utilize additional outdoor spaces, businesses and organizations. Anyone located on public streets and sidewalks could expand outdoors through an expedited process and through this new ability to use parking spaces. We did public engagement during those programs in 2020 and 2021. We received and really continue to receive positive feedback about those additional outdoor dining areas. In 2021, we kind of took the things we learned and worked on some public space management guidelines. We've been continuing to work with this task force to look at the different trade-offs of how different uses of public space have both, pros and cons, but also to think about what could and should be prioritized for improvements in the future. And outdoor dining has continued to be prioritized as something that needs updates. In late 2021, we had a work session with the Downtown Commission and Multimodal Commission. And some of the key questions that we asked, we dug real deep into outdoor dining, and we're going to go over some of the feedback that we received at that time, which has informed what we're proposing in these updates. And the last time that we engaged with council on this specifically was with this committee in June of 2022. Next slide, please. So a couple of the questions that we got feedback on heading into this process to make updates is 6 feet in clear space on sidewalks enough? That's what we require now. And for the most part, it's like, yes, but it depends because sometimes things kind of encroach into that 6 feet. But if 6 feet can be maintained, then yes. Should an outdoor dining permit fee be based in part on the amount of space being used? Yes. Should parking spaces be able to be privatized for dining? For the most part, yes. This has been something that's been popular and for the most part very much supported. Should permitting standards encourage businesses to remove items from the sidewalk when the business is closed? It's kind of a more innovative question. We heard yes. Should there be a cap and limit to the number of streeteries downtown? We kind of heard no, probably not to start. And should parklets or streeteries be open to the public when the business is closed? We heard yes. So next slide, please. And I should clarify that during the temporary initiative, we referred to dining in parking spaces as parklets. Moving forward, we're referring to these as streeteries. So to talk a little bit about our approach to kind of balancing some of these public and private uses, we would like to offer a few options to businesses moving forward with their new permits. They can make the space available outside of business hours. So when they're closed, maybe that's picnic tables that stay out all the time, and there would be signage indicating that. They could consolidate. I swapped option number 1 and number 2, but they could consolidate their dining furniture. So maybe, moving tables and chairs just adjacent to the storefront when the business is closed. And then that sidewalk opens back up for busking or mobility or other uses. Option 3, the space remains privatized for use by that business all the time, even when the business is closed. That is how the outdoor dining program works now. We are proposing a new annual fee of $500 for that. And that revenue that would come in could be used in the future towards supporting businesses to build streeteries or some other public space improvements to be determined, but it's something that we've been getting some input on as well. And next slide, please. And I think this will be Chris talking about our proposed fees.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Chris Collins with the Planning and Urban Design Department, the City of Asheville. And Dana's mention of the public use fee is a great segue into talking about how we went about establishing new fees for this program. So fees are being updated in order to align with the values of the program and enable improved operations. And we have been researching fees in related cities to create a benchmark. And you see some of that in front of you now. I won't go line by line on this, but the main idea here, what you see is fees that are granularly based. I should have chosen an easier word to say. On square foot used rather than blanket fees or categories of square feet being utilized by the restaurant or permittee. Go to the next slide, please. In developing our streetery fee development, this is an entirely new animal for us. There were no fees for this during the pandemic and the COVID response and the temporary program. So what we've looked at is, of course, those benchmarks that we saw before. We've also looked at things like the cost to the city to provide the service and market rates for that retail space that'll be occupied by dining areas. And without going through this in detail, you'll see that if you were to add all of these fees up, they'd be very enormous fees, but they did help inform us on how to develop fees for this new program. Next slide, please. So after taking all these things into consideration, we think that the proposed fees will be based on the amount of space used by an outdoor permit holder, create partial cost recovery for the revenue lost from the city and the city staff time needed to run the program. And as Dana stated earlier, the public space use fee, a unique element of this program that creates an incentive to keep public spaces public outside of business operating hours. And we have presented these fees a few times to several stakeholder organizations such as AIR and have had pretty positive responses so far. Go to the next slide, please. Next, I'm going to talk to you about the key updates to the standards we're looking at. So we're looking to create a clarification on the aspects of site design. And as we saw from the information that was gathered prior to this program, we want to create clear space for mobility and access to utilities, as well as ensure that things such as transit stops, pedestrian ramps, and safety features can operate correctly. And some of the highlights of those include an additional 18-inch buffer between 6-foot clear space and adjacent movable seating, just to keep that zone clear, and an additional 18-inch adjacent to roadways. We're also proposing signage to make the operation of these spaces clear to pedestrians and customers of the businesses. And for streeteries, it's key that we would be requiring platforms to be built rather than stepped in off the curb and place tables within the parking space. Another thing that we are proposing to do differently is that new structures are not to be bolted or permanently affixed to the sidewalk or public infrastructure, although I'll add an asterisk there that those with an existing encroachment agreement with the city would be allowed to remain as a part of that agreement. All right, next slide, please. So all of these standards are going to be illustrated and clarified in an outdoor dining guide. And the goal with this guide being separate from the ordinance is to create an easy to use and easy to update guide that features detailed graphic standards and best practices to help folks get off the ground with these applications, and also to help achieve compliance with the standards and get a good quality and safe functioning product on the ground. We think this will be a great approach, something we've seen done in Raleigh and other cities throughout the country, just to make this a user-friendly process. And next slide, please. Speaking of user-friendly processes, alongside the new ordinance and guide, staff have been working to develop a user-friendly process that will help ensure the success of applicants and protect the important elements of public space. We are really working to understand that our permit applicants in this situation are most likely restaurant operators, not people who are often obtaining permits for things from the city. And we do want to make this an easy process and a clear process, but it's also important that we get the information we need. So as a whole, we'll be looking at a zoning coordinator review of applications, an inspection process, which will be new, just a quick inspection to make sure what goes on the ground is what has been approved and standards are being met, and some proactive compliance downtown through the Development Services Compliance Division. Next slide, please. This chart is a little much to look at on a presentation because there's a lot going on here, but I'll summarize that we'd be looking at one application for streeteries, sidewalk dining, and renewal that would streamline the process and take our applicants through an easy-to-use process designed for each one, staff level review for sidewalk dining, a renewal process that would involve really no review as long as nothing had changed, just a verification of standards. And with a streetery being a more intensive application involving a structure within the city right away and more detailed standards, honestly, than sidewalk dining, those will be reviewed by the city's technical review committee, which is, again, an administrative review, but it is made up of reviewers from the city, including fire, zoning, special events, public works, transportation, among others. All right. And that is the last slide I'm going to cover for you here. I'm going to turn it back over to Dana to talk about engagement.
Thanks. So as I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of engagement about downtown public space use kind of generally. And what we've tried to do as part of this project is to build, utilize what we've done and build on that and learn from that. Also, obviously, during COVID, when we learned a whole lot. So using what we learned through engagement, but also through kind of opening up a whole new thing during COVID, it kind of helped us realize some of the things that we had been doing maybe could use some improvement. And so we've been learning a lot over the past many years, and we've really been focusing mostly on kind of impacted stakeholders to go discuss these updates and get some feedback, and ask folks a bunch of questions to see if we're kind of getting this balance right. And for the most part, we've gotten really good feedback to this point. Next slide, please. And so just to talk a little bit about the timeline, we've engaged with different stakeholder groups since the spring. We are with you today, and we plan to go to the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee with the proposed fee updates in October. And we plan to go to City Council with those fee updates and the new ordinance October 24th. Again, as Chris mentioned, we're designing the guide to be able to be updated, and we expect to learn alongside the community during this first year of rollout. Are there things that need to change? Are there, this program is going to evolve just like programs all across the country in the same way are being tried and are evolving. And so we will open the application process November 1st. We're going to set up information sessions to walk businesses through what this new process looks like, specifically for those streeteries. It's a more intensive process. And we'll start a new permit period in January 2024, which will run with the calendar year. Next slide, please. So again, with our key takeaways, we are making updates to the city's outdoor dining program as applied to public spaces. This includes a new ordinance, updated fee structure, and an outdoor dining guide that details standards. We're applying lessons learned during the temporary initiatives and the ongoing work we've been doing with the community to try to manage our active spaces better. It includes the use of on-street parking spaces moving forward through a long-term permitting program. Access and mobility are being prioritized, as well as greater public benefits whenever possible, and administrative management of the program is also being clarified and improved. And next slide, please. With that, we would welcome any feedback, any questions that you have.
Well, Dana, I'd like to thank you very much for all the work you've done on this and the people that helped you. And I think it's something that can actually change the complexion of what Asheville really is. I could see that actually growing into something special here. One question I would like to ask you is how many outdoor dining areas do we have presently or during the COVID at that, how many did we have at that time and moving forward? I was just concerned about moving forward. Maybe it would be even more, and how would we handle the increase of requests for outdoor dining?
So since January 2022, we made the sidewalk dining process easier during COVID. And in January 2022, we required that folks go through the pre-existing permitting process again. And we have 26 businesses that have sidewalk dining permits. And I think every single one of those is in downtown, but it doesn't mean it only applies to downtown. We had about 22 businesses have parklets during COVID, and we have 13 businesses now that have the parklets. And so even though we haven't charged fees and the standards, we do have standards, but we intentionally made it pretty easy, relatively easy to be able to do. Some businesses have decided not to continue to have that outdoor space. It just becomes, too much to manage, or doesn't make sense for whatever reason. Maybe the structure needs more investment than they're able to make. So with the new standards that we're proposing, we are requiring that a structure be built. We are requiring fees. These fees are very much in line with what other cities are charging, but compared to not having a fee, this $3,000 or $4,500 fee is significant. We don't anticipate And we've gotten 2 inquiries since the temporary program, since we stopped taking new applications during the temporary program. So that was fall of 2021. We've just gotten 2 inquiries. So we don't anticipate a flood of businesses wanting to utilize the parking spaces. But of course, the first year, I think, will be a time of learning for all of us. And if there needs to be certain, limits per block or per area or other layers, I think we can look at that together.
Thank you. Does any other council persons have any? Okay. Councilwoman Turner?
Dana, quick question, because this came up after our last meeting where I heard this presentation. I would love to know how many total parking spaces we have in use for these. I heard you say it was like 19 now, but I'm not clear if that's 19 businesses or 38 spaces, because sometimes they have 2. The other thing is, what happens when a conflict arises? Like the bike lane patent experience is teaching us that some of the concerns we're hearing is that we're losing parking spaces. And then if you look in that area, you've got restaurants with outdoor dining and dining in parking spaces. So the question that came to me was, why does a business get to have both outdoor dining space that is on the sidewalk and a parking space while we're going through this change that's going to take so much parking? So I guess my question is, if we have other ordinances that come into play that create a conflict, do we have some language around, we might have to take this parklet back or this parking space back?
Thank you. That's a really good question. To your first question about number of parking spaces, so 20 on-street parking spaces are currently being utilized, but that doesn't include the spaces on Wall Street, which used to be metered spaces, but will not be parking spaces anymore. There's only loading and ADA spaces on Wall Street now. So total, if you include those, it's 24 or 25. Regarding future changes to corridors, there is language that that states that if changes to the side, maybe sidewalk expansions will happen, and that's a public investment. These streeteries are removable. It's very different than a permanent privatized space or permanent infrastructure. And part of that point is when we do work to be strategic about whatever the changes are to the streetscape, the city could request that it is removed. In terms of having sidewalk seating and a streetery, we are prioritizing that clear space be maintained. And so we have a couple new tools for that in the standards. At this point, we aren't proposing that businesses have to pick between one or the other so long as they can achieve both. But if it's problematic, that's exactly the type of thing that could be updated later, or we'd welcome, feedback that you have.
Thank you. I guess it came up because, and we went over this more at the Downtown Commission, how the restaurants that can have the adjacent seating in these spaces, it has to be like adjacent to their property. It can be in front of the restaurant, or you can be one of the next door restaurants. So I guess the concern came up about equity, like if all businesses can't access them, then what happens when one is utilizing both and therefore just out of chance they asked first, so their neighbors now can't get any? You know what I'm saying? Like, I just know this has come up recently. And I'm talking about Tupelo Honey. I don't mean to be so vague, but they have the pretty significant outdoor dining that is enclosed and on the sidewalk. And now they nothing on them. Just it's them working about.
Sage, you're going in and out quite a bit. We can't hear you.
I will offer one thing, and that is that if parking spaces don't align exactly with frontages generally. If a portion of the proposed streetery is in front of another business, we're asking for consent from the impacted business. And so that's one way there may be conflicts, but we want to create tools to at least try to avoid those. And I also think that this could be one of the things that we learn in time. We didn't want to over-regulate if it wasn't necessary, but we are going to require that consent. Maggie?
And it seems like given you've built into this an annual cycle that
Correct.
should a new business come in, they show up and they're like, oh, I want in on this. Like that annual cycle could trigger renegotiations, new conversations if businesses are changing or having different changing needs. So however you design that process, maybe the consent is annual, but yeah, it sounds like building in a structure to flag for what you're saying, Sage, of changing priorities amongst neighboring businesses is a good idea.
That's great input. Thank you.
Yeah, and Dana, I can add, just speaking to what Councilwoman Ullman said, that this is not a zoning provision. This is in the municipal code under public space. So it's not really a non-conforming situation. So it is that annual permit situation. So should something arise, the permit may or may not be renewed, you know.
I had some thoughts and a question. I spent some time with the proposed fees because I want our downtown businesses to be healthy, and public space is so valuable and so competitive downtown. And I want to make sure that we're close to market rate or comparisons. And so I didn't pull out my spreadsheets. I trust y'all do that work, right? But if you had to give a guiding comment on how our fees meet comparisons in other communities, did we try and strike parity with our neighboring communities, or are we going to be losing a bunch of money in the parking fund now? Or just if someone could tell me a little bit more about the fee design and its financial impacts to us, and if there were any kind of strategic forks in the road in your design that you went so we could understand.
Yeah, I can take a stab at this, Dana, and jump in anywhere I leave a gap. But we spent a good deal of time looking at other cities, so that was definitely a consideration, right? And they're not small fees, especially when we get into streeteries. It's generally a substantial fee. So then we kind of dug into, well, what would those fees look like for the city of Asheville? And there was a slide with a lot of numbers on it, but it really went over what kind of meter revenue are we actually losing by closing a space? So what's the hit on that parking services fund? And we tried to get a handle on staff time as well. And that includes hey, how much time does it take to process an application, do a quick inspection, but also how much time does it take to staff the appropriate people to ensure compliance, right? Enforcement or whatever. And then we also took the approach of looking at kind of market rate. What would a restaurant pay for the space if they were renting extra leasable area for the restaurant? And really, a lot of those numbers came to the same place individually. But if you added them all together, it'd be an astronomical fee. So honestly, yeah, there's probably some cost to the city to provide the program under the current fee structure. And then it's really just about how those fees get distributed, right? How much of that goes to compensate the parking fund versus how much goes back into a general fund to compensate the staff time being used. And I don't think we've really designed that aspect of where the fees go yet, but we've had conversations for sure.
I'll just add that we tried to look at other cities that have very active urban environments. There's quite a range in fees. Some places charge basically nothing. They're still encouraging, trying to revitalize. And so we tried to look at the areas where this is being more actively managed. And so we got a little bit more granular. Charging per square foot really encourages people to think about the space that's being utilized. So for businesses downtown now that are have a couple tables, they may actually be paying less For businesses that have very large outdoor dining areas, they're going to be paying significantly more. So charging on that per square foot basis is also just, it's something we saw other cities that face similar types of circumstances as us, something that they're doing. Some of them charge per table and per chair. We're going with per square foot, but we hope it encourages thoughtfulness on utilization.
Yeah, I really like the switch from how we're currently doing it with the tiers to the square foot for sidewalks. That makes a lot of sense. With the streeteries, are those fees? Yeah, they are annual. They say annual. So it's a pretty substantial investment for a business. But then again, they're increasing their square footage. And if they can get 5 more tables, they can turn that or, so it's a business calculation. So we're giving everybody really clear guidelines to plan business expansions or planning whatever they're going to do. Yeah, that seems pretty thoughtful. My other question, well, I guess not a question, just like a thought to share is that I love this program. Before I was on council, I volunteered on the committee you've been leading, Dana. Like, I think this is really good for our economy, good for our community. I also know that having been a downtown worker for years, that we always have these conflicts where there's just not enough space on the sidewalks to house how vibrant our community is. And so I really value looking at all of our public space, which includes our roads and our parking spaces, and saying, what's the purpose here? We don't have a downtown to store cars or to move cars. We have a downtown for people. And so giving businesses the opportunity to say, you know what, for us, I'd really be more interested in having dining in that space than parking, lets them signal to us what their needs are to run healthy businesses. So I value that. I guess the question I have is, given how much conversation there has been recently by some businesses about parking spaces, if I'm a business downtown and I don't want a streetery, but I really want to make sure there's a parking space, can I knock on this door and say, look, I'll pay $3,000 a year to ensure that I have parking for my clients?
I think the short answer is no. And I could ask Janice, because I think there's some legal basis for that. But this program is really specifically about creating active, safe environments, supporting the local economy in this particular way. More eyes on the street, it creates a place where people feel comfortable and people want to be. And we've heard that time and time again. And so the nature of this use and having people utilize the space is different than having the space be utilized for parking. So those are my comments on that. But Janice, if you have anything to add.
No, I think you're right. Absolutely right, Dana. We can't convert a public parking space into a private parking space, but we can choose to convert a public parking space into some other use for even though it's private, but it's a sort of publicly motivated to serve the public. So yeah, you can't convert public-private into private parking.
So private parking isn't a public use or public benefit, and so it wouldn't justify. I could see people saying that, considering how often that conversation comes up. And then the third bucket of conversation is kind of reflecting, Dana, on your point that we saw a flood of these needs during COVID and kind of a tapering off demand. We might be at a point where it's not like we're going to see a tripling by any means of these things. But as we get to just more clear guidance, I could see as businesses decide which route they're going to go for the street or for the outdoor dining, if they have the option 1, space becomes publicly accessible, option 2, option 3. I guess what I'm getting at here is I could imagine if I were a downtown business and I wanted to expand and start doing something, I would say, yeah, I really want to do this. And I'm going to put out this furniture and I might tuck it up or I might chain it up. But what are you going to do, city government, to ensure that no one cuts the chain and steals my chairs, or that no one is sleeping on the fortified bench and causing problems for whatever. So I guess when we were talking about fees and we were looking at cost recovery, we talked about staff timing for processing. Did we account for a potential increase in public safety support because the use is just going to be different. And it's not, we're used to what it looks like to protect vehicles that are locked up, and we don't see a lot of car break-ins downtown, but we just might see the use being different. Have we thought about if there's any potential unintended consequences?
Yeah, it's a really important point. And we haven't quantified exactly what that will look like. I think that we are, trying to be innovative and testing this out. It's something that other cities do. We know San Francisco has had a parklet program for decades. It's something they do. There's definitely going to be things to learn along the way. We don't hear a lot of issues currently with how outdoor dining spaces get utilized, even though they're considered privatized all the time. Of course, things happen. So I think it's going to be a time of learning for us. And, if furniture gets stolen, I think that would be handled consistently with someone's private
Property crime.
Stolen. I mean, I think inevitably there's a role of the police department in some of this or a lot of this, but I think we will have to see how it goes.
That's helpful. Even just hearing it, like your response to that could have been, oh, that's the number one problem we hear from other cities. It becomes this big, that's not what I'm hearing at all. I'm hearing things can come up, we'll be agile and adaptive, but it hasn't been a major flag that you've seen in your research. So that alone is pretty useful and reassuring. So I appreciate that. Thanks for letting me hit up a bunch of questions, even though I've seen this before. It keeps making me think.
Thanks. And I'll just add again, really cities, some cities were early in rolling out these long-term programs. Other cities are still trying to figure out what that looks like. So there is a lot of, learning to do across the country and seeing what's working and what's not. So we're in good company with this.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any other questions or concerns? If not, then if someone would like to make a motion to have this sent over to council.
I'm happy to make a motion. I recommend City Council adopt the proposed text amendments to the city's outdoor dining ordinance, along with proposed fee changes, and that staff move forward with proposed updates to the outdoor dining program as applied to public streets and sidewalks.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Sage. Okay, we'll do a roll call. Councilwoman Owen,
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner,
Aye.
and myself, aye. The motion passes. So we'll be looking forward to full council taking a look at this. I'm quite sure it's going to be, I think it's going to be well taken. I truly do believe that. So looking forward to it. Okay, thank you, Dana. Great.
Great job, Dana.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris, very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda, it's the FY24 work plan follow-up, and the resource will be Bid Woody. This is the final review of the fiscal year 2024 committee work plan, and this is for information sharing only. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kilgore and other members of the committee. So we did go over this at your last meeting. So this is really the follow-up and to try to finalize the PED's work plan. I'll give the caveat that work plans are fluid documents. So this is final for now, but it doesn't mean that we won't have adjustments as we go through the fiscal year. So Katie, if you can go to the next slide. And this will be a really brief slide deck. And I'm going to stop at a couple of slides and get some feedback from council members as we go. Again, annual work plans are just a tool to help you organize the work, in this case of the PED committee. Typically, your work plan is going to focus around your city council goals, strategic priorities, and even some of the scope of your committee as it exists. Committee work plans are a combination of updates and administrative items. We'll show a couple of those in a minute, as well as policy considerations. And again, we'll go through a few of those projects as well. But the other piece for the PED committee to consider is your work plan is also an opportunity for you to work with advisory boards and to even ask those boards or committees to do things for you in terms of shaping or discussing or researching potential policies. And then finally, as I mentioned, these are dynamic. So it's what's today's work plan may look different a few weeks from now, depending on policy objectives and things that the committee wants to accomplish. So it is a fluid document. Katie, if you can go to the next slide. So today we're going to try to finalize this generally for now. I want to get some feedback from council, but again, we can come back to this as we identify new projects or anything we want to take a look at. Generally, what we'll do is try to have regular updates from advisory boards. I did meet with the department directors prior to today to try to identify some of the projects that are forthcoming. Those are things we'd like to have the project managers come to you and present. We just had one with Dana and Chris here to give an update on the dining ordinance, or outdoor dining ordinance for Winter Council. So that was a great example. And of course, anything else that the committee may want to see on the work plan. So if we can do the next slide, Katie. So these are really what we identified as the annual update items. We've got a couple of these scheduled. We've had some that have happened in the previous months. So again, I'm going to keep working with department directors and advisory board chairs to try to get these regular updates to the PED committee. You can see the 6 council appointed advisory boards. Those are the ones that are created by city council. And I think at a minimum, we want to have each of those come once a year to give an update on their work and their efforts. The other are really more community-based or partnership organizations. EDC, that's one that we're trying to get on the calendar in the near future. You can see the Mountain Community Capital Fund. That's another one we want to try to schedule. And of course, at the last committee meeting, Councilwoman Ullman suggested that having the French Broad River NPO come for occasional updates. Don't have that scheduled yet, but we'll work on getting that, somebody from that agency here as well. Those are pretty, I would say, informational type bodies that would come to you, but these also could be, particularly your advisory boards. These are also boards that could serve as a resource for your committee work if you wanted to ask them to do something. So I'll stop here just for a second to see if there's any questions on this slide and who we kind of have represented here as perhaps annual update items. Let's say that looks good. So next slide, Katie. So this really represents a little more of the policy items. So what I did before this meeting is went to the different departments that would ordinarily bring business items to this council committee and really got a list of the items that they're either projects that are underway or they plan to begin in the next fiscal year. So should recognize several of these because a lot of these are on the organizational work plan and align directly with your council priorities. Again, I'm going to show a schedule on the next slide, but real quickly, just wanted to give council a minute to look at some of the policy review items that we have in the queue and have any discussion about what's on here or maybe what could be missing from here. And I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Councilwoman Ullman.
I haven't seen this language saying the Living Asheville Comp Plan 5-year update. What's that?
That's a good question. And it is new. That was one of the items that our new planning director, Steph Monson-Dahl, suggested. And about 5 years ago, our comprehensive plan was adopted. And ordinarily, you want to, as a matter of practice, update those about every 5 years. Steph has asked a staff person to kind of go into that document, do a deep dive, and try to identify, things that we've done or things we've accomplished, and perhaps things that we still need to work on. So I think that'll initially come back to you as just kind of really an update on what we've done with our comp plan for the past 5 years. And it may be the kind of thing that we may want to have a couple of meetings on that to talk about where we're at with the comp plan and what we want to accomplish.
So it's like a progress report or
like a progress report. It's not going to be, I guess maybe clarify, it's not going to be, I don't think it's actual updates to the comp plan, but it's going to be like a progress report. It could lead to updates of the comp plan.
Yeah. Which kind of leads to, we've been talking at council about looking at chapter 7 of the UDO, and I don't see this up here, which we also talked about last month. And, you know, if we're having to choose between recommending updates to the comp plan, like I'd rather just start getting something done on that. And then also we've kind of been emailing staff about the multifamily housing streamline process and potentially an overlay. And I feel like PED is a really good place for that. And then also there's been a lot of changes in short-term rental policy around the state and in other municipalities. And that's another thing we've kind of been emailing with council and staff about. So those would be things that I feel like this would be a great committee to work with on that and are timely. So I don't know if other councilwomen have reactions to those, if those seem like the right place for this, or your thoughts on this?
Go ahead.
I agree. I think both of those are needed and a great place to come through PED.
Yeah, I also agree with that. Thank you, Maggie.
So Councilwoman Ullman, just make sure I heard that. So UDO update, which I know is also in our council priorities. So having more information about moving that forward. I think the second thing you mentioned was the idea of expediting or somehow having policies in place to expedite or support affordable housing developments or policies. Am I getting that one right? The other
one is that an idea that's been batted around from councilwomen for quite some time, and then recently just over emails in the last several weeks, is a multifamily housing community benefits overlay table. And I mean, the UDO updates and that might go hand in hand to some extent. Like, what do we need to do to improve chapter 7? But I think however you want to stage those, but having some type of multifamily housing overlay is a conversation that we've been talking about. And then the short-term rental regulations.
I was just wondering, Maggie, when we talked about the housing situation, I'm just wondering, will there be some type of conflict with the housing committee as opposed to what they're doing? And I don't want to get into the weeds where we have, us discussing what middle housing and what we think it needs. And then you've got the housing committee that actually have their agenda to what they need. So I'm just really concerned about that particular area being something that, okay, Sage is on that committee, so she can chime in. Okay, Sage.
Yeah, I just think similar to, like the street areas going to downtown and PED. I think the housing stuff would come to both housing and PED because it will have a pretty big impact on our planning, and as Maggie's saying, even chapter 7. So I think it makes sense to come to both. And they don't need to be, mutually exclusive or at the same time. I mean, we can hear from housing and take their input, take it to PED, and then on to council if needed or as needed.
Okay. So I guess we should still have some type of guidelines as to where those intersect. Would that make sense? Sage?
I mean, I think that makes sense. Ben, are you trying to get us to help you get a document together of what should be on this work plan? Or I guess there's more slides, maybe? I haven't looked.
Yeah, Katie, if you can go to the next slide, I feel like that'll help a little bit and we can come back. Yeah, so we're really trying to plan out your fiscal year with items we want to schedule for you to consider. So just to take those 3 suggestions that were just presented. So for example, I'm actually really glad you brought up STR regulations because I know we have a program in place. I know the county's considering one. Lots of places do lots of different things. There was a court decision in Wilmington that had some impact even to our program. So that's an easy one. That's something I can probably get on your agenda in the next meeting or two. Like we could do that pretty quickly. That's a great piece of feedback from this committee. So let us like that one I can commit to right away. We can bring you back an update on the STR environment, not only in Asheville, but across the state. So yes, Councilwoman Turner, I think we're trying to take what we know needs to come to you, plan that out. Because again, there are other projects on the previous slide that haven't even started yet. So I can't plug them into a date yet, but I know that like, so for example, when the Patton Avenue corridor study starts, I know I want to come to PED early in that process and get you up to speed on that. Is that helpful a little bit, Councilwoman Turner?
Very helpful. And I just thought maybe it'd help us all. Also, Brad is working on something related to the STRs. So you may want to check with him before we throw it on an agenda.
Yeah, I would do that. I've been talking with Brad a little bit about that, but again, and then just to go back, Councilman Ullman, I think like the UDO update, obviously that would need to come forward as like a budget request from the planning department. So again, maybe beginning discussions on that can be something we can do as we move into the budget process this year.
Yeah.
Planning and Zoning Commission may be a good advisory board to have some input on that. So
I think that would be great. And that timing would work too. Because I think part of the way that we were given the feedback during the council retreat was that no one wants to update the full UDO. No one even wants to update every single letter in Chapter 7. So can we have a strategy conversation with PED around where our priorities would be and what our goals would be for updates? And if we do that this fiscal year, that then would allow you to scope out, we might need X dollars to get help with that in next fiscal year. So yeah, if that's, coming Q1 of, or I guess our Qs are different, January through March.
Q3.
Yeah, the timeline so that it's teed up for budget. I feel like that would be great. And that would give you all a lot of time to really work through. You already have a lot of stuff on your plate. And then the multi overlay we talked about, we got to get the right name for that, but I think that's also Brad has a lot in that court as well, but I think PED is a good resource for him and planning in that one. So I don't know if y'all have thought any further about the timing on that one, but timing is of essence in all these problems. Thanks.
Just wanted to step and say I really support the idea of PED kind of being this board that champions the process of drilling down what parts of Chapter 7 could be looked at as we move forward. I love, Maggie, everything you said, I support. I think that's a great way to handle it. And this committee is probably the best.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then that gets kind of standard to your point of like, there's going to be parts of it that are going to be really housing focused that dovetail. And it's like, okay, once we prioritize what parts of Chapter 7, then maybe there's some handing off, but there's just so much in Chapter 7 and there's so many goals we're achieving. It's not just about housing, it's about economic development, it's about neighborhood resilience, whatever. So doing the update, the UDO process could be really in support of getting clarity in the other areas and how we collaborate with the other committees.
So this was my last slide, other than the key takeaways again. So that's helpful. That's a couple of items that, and just, I'll of course want to go back and talk to planning staff because as they work through their sequencing of projects and workload and everything, we want to make sure that they're in a position to be responsive. So maybe a question today for this committee is, what is the format that you want to talk about your work plan moving forward, or how would you like me to best share information with you? Do we want to do this at the end of meetings, or do we want to do it some other fashion? What works best for you as committee members?
Ben, I really liked how HCD and AHAC kind of piloted this last year, where we said, we laid out the timeline and the months we were going to do, just like this slide says. But under that, or across from it on a spreadsheet, we had the other committees that we would want to hear from. So we made sure their calendars were in sync. We even had some outcome goals, like is it a policy change, et cetera. But I think making sure we dial in the other committees that will layer into these processes like housing or multimodal were probably the biggest helpful thing in making that timeline. At HCD, we were able to say, okay, well, in 3 months, we need to know the feedback from AHAC on this item. So let's get them queued up. So that will probably help me just seeing like the whole process, where it will go and who will experience it and come back to us, et cetera.
I think too, for me, something that would be useful is as we keep a clear lane between the policy and the operations and how it can easily get blurry, in these sequencing, getting clear when we're having kind of a goal conversation, like what are we trying to accomplish? Like if I look at this and I see a transit planning update, that could mean a million. It's very like operational. It's very tactical. In a different community, that could be abolishing transit, but like that's not what we're talking about. And so just making sure that even when we're looking at this and when we're planning for it, it's really explicit that we are being asked to contribute to the strategy and the goals of it. Because I think sometimes we get many more updates on like how staff is doing this and what the design is, but it's not really always clear when the strategy setting is coming to us.
Okay, that's good feedback.
Do we have any more comments on our work plan update? If not, the next thing on our agenda will be public comments. And I just want to check with Katie to see if we have anyone in the queue.
Let me check one moment. No, we do not.
And if there are any more comments or something that council would like to share at this time? If not, then we are adjourned. Thank you.
One.